So we can keep it. We can keep it so Sam can see, but they can see as well.
Just like a little bit to get the feeling of the room.
Maybe slightly more so you can see this audience. Oh yeah. And they'll get supervised as a.
So basically from raw material to the right, but the manufacturing process. The beginning and the end. Right. Really good direction to recap. Now Tesla and some other countries. What did you say that? Yeah, because I think it's quite hard to find someone really oh yeah, you also probably use it for logistics.
Was that new?
Right. Okay, so you just search things. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah,
I think that would be super interesting. Let me know. In my opinion, probably you should do that way earlier. Yeah, we should have done that. Yeah, true. But anyways, probably you got some response.
No.
Because they're very aware because the carbon actually earn a lot, so sometimes they sell other companies. Yeah, but anyways.
Really late. How do you really?
Anyways, if you design like there can be some sort of thing like t-shirts being sort of like how many people? I wouldn't be surprised if I'm really good. I think this should come in the first. Just go away. So we just way earlier, but you have to yeah, I know. So sometimes they partially they say
I'm not actually
interested in the direction that's on me.
Hi everyone, hello everyone in the room, and hello everyone. We're live on YouTube. Exciting! Welcome to the RCA Service Design Practitioner Talk this week. Our practitioner talks are for our students and wider audiences to get an understanding of how organisations, large-scale organisations work, how they work together on innovation for the people that are working with them, as well as for the people that they're serving in products and services. So it's also to give a really good indication of service design in very different contexts. And today we're delighted to welcome Sam Yuen, who was introduced to our programme by Serene, one of our second year students. And Sam was previously co-head of Experience Strategy and Design at GovTech in Singapore, which is a really interesting title in itself. And she's currently a student as well at Goldsmiths doing indie gaming. So I'm going to leave her to introduce herself, go into more depth about that. We'll have the talk with Sam, and then we'll shut out the world to have our own conversations with Sam. So thank you, over to you, and thank you again.
Everyone, nice to see you and thank you for coming. And also hello to the people on YouTube and on Zoom. So my name is Sam. My pronouns are they, she, and as Carolyn said, I am currently a student at Goldsmiths doing my master's. I have 15 years in experience design, but I really started in hospitality. And being on the service delivery end of what you're all designing for. And then it wasn't until I was 27 that I discovered UX by accident in a forum of all places. And so that started my journey into design, and I never looked back. So I started as a little fish being a UX designer, and then I decided to specialize in research, became a bit more like a shark. And then when I joined the public service to grow design rigor in GovTech, I started coaching teams, and that felt to me a little bit more like being an octopus. And then in my last 15 months before I left, I co-headed a design team. And that's where the chicken comes in, because I feel a little bit like a mother hen. Yeah, so the design team that I looked after primarily looks at two programs. One was the future of education, and the other is about designing Singapore's national digital identity. So that's a bit about my design background. If you look at my body of work, I've mainly shifted from designing products and services and moving into designing for change in people and in teams. And I picked this MA and I went to it, wanting to learn more about game design and bringing play, elements of play into change, which can always feel very challenging and, ominous. But then I started the course and I had so much fun making art that I'm just kind of putting all that on hold. And so these are some of the games and art that I've made. I made things about the human condition. So there are things about coping mechanisms and anxiety and imposter syndrome, which I think are not very familiar to all of us as designers. So yeah, so that's me. And I'm kind of curious what you're worried about as you move into your first job or your post-graduation job. Like, I have no idea if I'm going to be a designer still, or if I'm still going to be a design leader without any team. So yeah, what are you worried about when you start working in service design? Just feel free to type it in or shout out so we will help look at the chat.
Explaining what service design is to anybody who is not familiar.
Yeah, explaining what service design is, right? I saw a hand back there. Everyone? Yeah. You can just shout, no worries.
Hey.
Hey, yeah.
And working on topics that is not necessarily that interesting.
Like what?
For me, I don't know.
Okay, sorry to put you on the spot. Yeah. Some of the industries that you'll be asked to work on may not be very exciting. I mean, government's not the most exciting thing. Bureaucracy and large enterprise services may not always be exciting. Any other worries?
Finding a job, right?
Yeah. Okay, and I was a hand behind Suri.
I think like stakeholder buy-in. Or your service design itself.
Yeah. Like, people are so hard.
Also, how to show the value of the work, work, because sometimes it cannot measure by the numbers or like data.
Yeah.
Someone online also, Zhao Han said, worried about people who don't recognize the importance of service design.
Yeah, so all very valid worries. Definitely things that designers in Singapore think about as well. So in today's talk, there's so many tools out there that you can find about design. right? Frameworks, methods, techniques, maps, canvases, the list goes on. Any guesses, what do you think I could possibly add today that is valuable yet out of sight? As you think about all the things you're worried about.
Yourself as a designer, like who you are.
Who you are.
Intuition. Intuition.
Intuition, yeah. Anyone else? There's no right or wrong answer.
Empathy.
Empathy, yeah, for other people. So if I had a bag of M&Ms, I would throw it to you because that's going to be one of the tools that I talked about. Yeah. So yeah, it's really more about us as the designer and the weight of the design work that we often feel like we have to carry on our shoulders, and less about the design process. Okay. If you have watched any of my older talks, you'll find some of the content a little bit familiar. And I guess it's also like this is stuff that I've been thinking about for a number of years. It's really my own personal practice. I'm not here to try and convince you of anything, just to share like this is what I take into my own practice, and hopefully it's going to be relevant to you. Having said that, if you think like this is really very boring or not interesting, it's okay if you leave. I'm not going to get offended. Okay, so I just want to put it out there. So yeah. I am also a little scatterbrained today, actually, because as a student, I just submitted an assignment this morning. So yeah, like switching heads. So yeah, I'm gonna be looking at my notes from time to time. So just, yeah. All right. So intuition. Throwing you some imaginary evidence. Right, so what is intuition? It's quick perception or insight. If you have no idea what intuition is, it's usually this feeling that's in your stomach or your body that kind of tells you like, oh, something's a bit off here, like, oh, I don't feel very safe, maybe I should get out. And so it's not surprised that it's also called gut feeling or instinct. You feel like your senses are tingling, there's something there, like, maybe, maybe I should follow my intuition and see what's there, right? So intuition is what you use, like, for example, when you're interviewing someone about mortgages, and then they start rambling on about how much shit their mom hoards at home, right? And so it's not in your discussion guide, right? So you might say, oh, but then maybe let's go back to the conversation. Or your intuition could say like, I think there's something there. By having this person just go on for 5 minutes about their mom, I could learn a little bit more about what did he grow up with that then informs his relationship with money today, right? So it's not related, but your intuition is going like, okay, I'll just give him 5 minutes. It's not going to kill the interview and then get so much more depth, right? Intuition is also what you use when you're doing a large study about how people clean their floors. And only one person out of the entire sample size takes a paper towel, wets it, and then wipes off the little fine dust when they're done with the sweeping, right? And they do it because there's no way you can pick up all that stuff with a broom. But if you have a wet paper towel, you can. And so the client was like, oh, no, it's only one person. Look at the data. Right? This is what the data is telling us, we should go that way. So this is not my story, but it was one that was told to me, and the researchers were like, I think there's really something there about this wet paper towel. So they spent 1 year convincing the client, right? Made a prototype and all that. And then what they ended up with was the Magic Clean wiper, which I think is very common today, right? Wet paper towel, stick it on your flat mop instead of the usual one, and then you can pick up all the fine stuff that's on your floor. But without intuition, you wouldn't go to the client and say, firstly, I think there's something here, and secondly, to take the stamina to go 1 whole year picking away at their stubbornness or whatever it is. and eventually get to this point, right? So the good news is that intuition is a muscle and you can train it. Like listening, like learning how to stand on stage and present, it's a muscle you can train. And the way to train it is very simple. Just listen to it before you look at your data. Right? And you can practice this, and this is what I get junior designers to do. Every time you watch a video, and here are a few different examples of videos, it can be emotional or fast-paced and instructional, or maybe you're watching a conference talk. And shout out to IXDA Singapore, by the way, that's my friend too. Yeah, so every time you watch a video, whether you take notes or not, at the end of the video, can you pause for a little bit and do 3 things? Okay, and that's recalling, connecting, and interpreting. So I'm going to use the first video because I really love it and you should totally watch it. It interviews 7 people who are 100 years old, and then they talk about their lives. So what's an example of recalling? It would be them saying, like, in a different form, one form or another, that, you know, social connection is what keeps me alive. Right? So, okay, that's something I recall, and I recall every one of them saying this. And then what is connecting? Connecting is when you take 2 forms of recall and you put them together. For example, I recall that they have a positive attitude to life. And I recall that someone said, I don't feel my age. Right? And then the way it comes together in interpreting is that, okay, when you add these 2 things up, maybe we can infer that age is just a number to them. And you can practice this at a very simple level with any video that you're watching. And you can also practice this when you synthesize your projects. Every time you do research, and then it's always like, okay, let's look at our notes and see what patterns we can pull out. My suggestion is to put that aside first. Listen to your gut, do your recalling, your connecting, your interpreting. It doesn't matter, it's not a sequence. It can come out all in a mess at the beginning. The more you practice it, the more you can get to the kind of interpreting stage rather than the recalling stage, right? And then only use the notes to supplement things that you might have missed or things that you recalled wrongly. And it can give you a very quick sense of the data much more quicker than, you know, looking at all the transcripts or doing transcripts and looking at all the transcripts and then doing patterns and stuff like that, right? And the great thing about this muscle is that you can use it in many other ways, right? Imagine that you were doing some research and the client came in and said, like, I missed a lot of that interview. Can you give me the 5 quick points? How are you going to pull the 5 quick points in 2 seconds? Right? You can do that because you've been practicing your recalling, your connecting, your interpreting, and it's like, yeah, you know, my intuition says these are the 3 to 5 things, and then I'm just gonna give me 10 seconds, and then I'll share that with you. Yeah. So that's intuition, and it kind of pairs nicely with intention. The purpose or attitude towards one's actions. What are some examples of being intentional to you guys? Nice big word, right? What does intentional really mean?
Picking a project to learn from it, that's your intention out of the project.
Yeah, to set your own intention, like this is what I want to get out of this project. Yeah.
Personal value behind.
Like, what are my personal values that I want to bring in?
Maybe knowing why you're doing certain things.
Anyone on Zoom? Okay, so let's have a look. I mean, I could really give a whole talk about being intentional, but here I'm just going to briefly talk about 3 layers that you can be intentional in. The first one is when you design products and services, right? 2 things that you can keep in mind, and you may notice, maybe not, I don't know, we'll see. And the first one is that every solution that you create creates new problems. Guaranteed. There's no perfect solution. You will always have something that you didn't think about and like, oh shit. Right. So like an example of this was in Singapore, we have this app called SingPass, which you can use to log into different government services. But before it was an app, it was a physical token, which we used for many, many years. And then one day government decided like, okay, we've got to move into digital transformation. Let's make it an app, right? By making it an app, it's great for your power users, right? For young people, for people who are savvy. And then what about old folks? What are people with disabilities? And they might be some of the more obvious audiences you think about, but what about people overseas who don't have a Singapore mobile number anymore? And so like you can't remember your password, you need to be verified, but if you don't have a Singapore number, then you can't get verified, right? And that creates a lot of friction and angst. So think about what else could go wrong when you're trying to solve the problem that you're immediately thinking about. Go beyond that. And yeah, I always joke that I'm like the most pessimistic person in the team because I'm always telling people like, this could go wrong, right? Oh, but if you don't do this, and then it will blow up here. Yeah, so not the best person to have in a ideation session sometimes, but great for like thinking about all this stuff. Okay. Second thing to think about is always asking for the sake of what. Right? Serene talked about asking why. I prefer to ask a what question because why can be quite subjective sometimes. Why do we have to do this? Because boss said so. I have no choice. But by asking what, you kind of shift the conversation into a more objective space. You can start to name the very things that you put into your research plan, and as the objectives, you can start, fleshing out the problems in more concrete ways than just the why, because boss said so doesn't really help you to design at all. Right? It just means that we've got to get it done by this time. Sure, I had something else here, but let me check. Oh, no, we're good. Okay. Yeah, so ask for what, for the sake of what does this help us to achieve? What are we doing this for? How does this help us to achieve the thing that we said we wanted to achieve? Right? And keep that in mind. Second layer to be intentional about is how you work with others, like stakeholders or teammates, right? And this is a great picture that I found because it can go both ways. Like, how often have you been working on something and then someone comes over and says like, hey, Sam, can you do this thing for me? How well were you listening? Because you were so busy doing your stuff, because you were preoccupied with your deadlines, because you were stressed and you couldn't really hear anything else. And then you just go, yeah, okay, just to get this person to go with, right? But then what happens when you're not listening well? Do you even know what you just agreed to? Do you know specifically what the person asked you to do? And maybe that's why you found yourself into this situation, because you forgot to do all these things that they had shared with you because you weren't listening well. Right? And yet on the other hand, if you're the one coming up to Sam and saying like, hey, can you do this thing for me? How clear was your request? What do we often think about when we ask someone to do something? What do we normally include?
When do I need it?
When do I need it? Not always though, you'll be surprised. Yeah, usually people like forget that. It's in their head, but they didn't say it out. Okay, what else?
What the request is.
What it is. And what do you mean by what it is?
What do they need from you?
Okay, yeah, what do you need to do? What does this kind of look like? Okay.
How long does it take?
How long it takes? Yeah. As in, if you're the person requesting it, you're saying, this is how long I think it takes.
No way, actually, that doesn't make any sense. I take it back.
You could say that though.
Maybe in your head, even yours might take longer than expected.
Exactly. A lot of this stuff is in our heads, right? We think about it and we have these expectations and these standards, but we don't always say it out. But if you don't say it out, and then the person you're giving the request to has their own ideas of what it is and how long it takes. And so how do you come together, right? So tasks and actions are usually the things that I've seen that is always in a request. But these other things are missing. Firstly, like, is the speaker and the listener even present? You know, if you're not present, just say, like, I can't talk now. And if you find yourself finding it very difficult to say, I can't talk now, maybe there's something there that you want to look at. Timeline, competence. Can this person actually do the thing that I need getting done? And like, I'm not gonna go to a junior designer and say like, hey, can you give me a research report in 3 days? Because there's no way. And obviousness, meaning like, what background do I know? It's all in my head that the other person doesn't know, but should probably know. Because context is everything, right? And sometimes without context, you do it in the way that you interpret, and then it doesn't end up being what you asked for. And satisfaction, which I think is really important, which is what standard do you want it complete? I'll use the report thing again. A report can be so many forms. It can be a post-it outline. It can be a Word doc. It can be a couple of pictures. Right? It can be a full-fledged slide deck. So what variant of this, when you say it's done, that can you share some examples of what it looks like? And you can use this as well, even if you're not the one making the request. If someone comes to you and says like, hey, can you do this, you can use this in reverse and say like, okay, but when do you want it? How do you want it done? And use the same things to clarify the request by yourself, even if the other person didn't do it. Yeah. All good? Cool. And the last layer is how you show up as a designer, as a human in life. And here I want to bring up two things. The first is what you say is what you do. And that's really all about maybe I'll just throw it as a question. If someone in your team is perpetually late with deadlines, how do you feel about that? Not great. You little shit. Hate you. Right. But what else is happening here? You start to not trust that this person can do their job. Right. Or if someone that you have a conflict with is like, yeah, we know we should really talk about that. Let's schedule a time, but the time never comes. Then what do you start to doubt after a while?
Well, you don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. So are they actually then being sincere? Right. So little things like this can affect how much people can trust you, right? Competence, sincerity, and so be intentional about, like, if you're gonna say something, then follow through and do it. And if you find yourself not being able to follow through, then just go back and say like, I said I was gonna do this thing, but I'm really terrified. Like, it's really making me uncomfortable. And I'm not ready to talk yet, but I just wanted you to know that I'm not avoiding you. It's just like, this makes me want to puke. Yeah. And the second thing that you could be intentional about is just be clear. Being clear is kind. Like, we often don't tell the truth or say something polite or make something up because we feel like maybe this person can't take it, or like, I don't want to be mean. But I think a lot of that has to do more with ourselves not being comfortable than maybe the other person. And so, yeah, are you able to find a way to give that feedback, even though it just, yeah, you just want to run away. And again, if you find that this is very challenging for you, there might be something there that's, that's in your way, which is a nice segue to the third tool, inclinations. Our tendencies, our habits, our patterns. Do you know what your patterns are? Do you know what you do when you're stressed? You know what emotions come out more frequently than others? Maybe as you look around at each other, you can like, yeah, no. But for yourself, do you know? And more importantly, to go one level deeper, do you know what the stories are behind those patterns? Right. And I'll give you an example by talking about myself. So this was the introduction that I had at the beginning. And then what I didn't say was that I've actually burned out 3 times in 6 years in design. That's nuts. Won't do it. Right. And so the pattern here is that I need to show that I am capable. And so I'm just going to keep working, because if I don't do this thing or I don't show that I can do more than I can do, then I'm not capable. Right? So it's really no surprise that I burned out 3 times. And funny thing about burnout is that you think you recognize the signals, but there are many different signals in burnout. So what is this whole pattern about? Like, why am I working so hard for? And so what happened to me when I was 21 was that I suddenly got agoraphobia, which is afraid of being outdoors. Couldn't go to class because I was just hiding at home and being really afraid, and then spending that much of time recovering from social anxiety. But what happened was that at 21, in my final year of bachelor's, was this feeling like I'm a complete failure. And if you come from an Asian background, like not graduating is like the worst. Having shame and all that stuff coming in, right? So therefore, I'm a failure. I need to show that I'm capable so that people do not think that I'm a failure, except like no one was thinking I'm a failure except myself. Right? It's all in my head, and it's just driving this pattern over and over again. And here are what the patterns look like in different forms. I talked about this, right? I need to show that I can tank it all. Probably picked out a bit of this from my mom too. She's very strong and she's like a silent warrior. Like, yeah, no problem. I'll just keep doing it. And then I break down and I start resenting the shit out of everyone. Hiding, not daring to show my work, not daring to show like early iterations or even like, sketches or draft points, because I was so worried that people would think I was not capable. And just this feeling like I don't deserve to ask for anything because I'm a failure. I'm a society failure, I'm a family failure, just period failure, right? And so I only asked for my first pay rise when I was 38. So that's just to show you how far-reaching some of these things, these stories can be driving the things that you do over and over again. This was how my days looked like. Have you ever thought about how you spend your days? Right. And I never really stopped to think about this until I saw this article from Wait But Why, and he had this experiment about breaking your days down into 15-minute slots. I was like, okay, that could be interesting because I'm a researcher, right? I love these things. So I just started plotting, and I think it wasn't until I saw this that I really felt the impact of my patterns. Like, holy shit. And what's happening here? I'm going to work, I'm working late, and then the moment I get home, I'm just avoiding everything. And I avoid everything by watching streaming shows. Right, and then because I don't want to go to work, I stay up late, hoping that the day will never come. And then the cycle continues. Right. Yeah, so what are you paying attention to in your own patterns? And then when you are aware of what your patterns are, what changes do you want to make? This is from, I think, May or June last year, just before I left. You know, I still watch a lot of streaming, but just being mindful to balance it out a little bit more with like reading and learning and going out and seeing friends, cooking, and sometimes exercising. Yeah. And if you think like, well, I haven't really burned out yet, you know, I should be fine. Like, what has this got to do with me? This is also what patterns look like. Do any of them resonate with you? Yeah, I see a lot of nods. Yeah. They're all patterns. They're patterns in the way you think. Thinking that I'm an imposter, thinking I'm not perfect. There are patterns in your emotions, like feeling numb, wanting to escape, getting upset. And there are also patterns in your body, right? Whenever you get stomach aches and stress, that stomach ache did not appear by accident, right? When you're doing a project and your whole back is aching, it's stress showing up in your physical body. So what are you paying attention to? Right? Is what I'll leave you with for this tool. Which then leads us to I before we. You know, in design, it's all about collaboration. You need to collaborate and do things with other people and co-design. Like, okay, it's always more and more and more outwards. Right? But what about yourself? How do you look after yourself? Do you have any boundaries that you set so that you can pay attention to and look after your health? Does anyone not know what boundaries are? I mean, it's thrown out a lot around in self-care stuff, but I just want to make sure. Okay, so maybe I'll just explain it a little bit. Boundaries are basically the line that you draw, and it's an invisible line. It is the line that says, I'm okay working till 9 p.m. Monday to Thursdays, but from Friday, 5 p.m., don't touch me. Or it's the line that says, okay, I really like helping people. Therefore, the line that I create for myself is to don't accept a request until the next day, so that I can give it a little bit more space to, you know, sit with it and listen to your gut and say like, you know, is this your habit saying yes, or is this really something that you can help with and then you would like to help with? And why is I before we important? You may have a different opinion, but to me, we are in the business of change. Yeah, sure, you know, like the aesthetic layer looks great and like we get to play with cool tech sometimes. But we're really in the business of change, and change takes a long time. And so when you are playing the long game, who do you think is going to win the long game, or your patterns? And by patterns, I mean you, the wearer of the pattern. So put your own oxygen mask on first. I mean, it's very easy to think about like, oh, I need to change the world. You can do so much with design and then overexert yourself. I'm not saying that's not important, but we can only do it when we are healthy. Right? So yeah, you have so much more to offer when you're not running on empty. The last tool is inner work, also called self-work, self-mastery. You might have heard some of the different variations. And what it is just the ability to work on yourself. Like having awareness is great, right? Okay, I know my patterns. I'm taking more self-care, I'm going for yoga, and doing a spa thing, I'm, meeting friends and eating more cake. But if you're not doing anything about the patterns, and you're not saying like, okay, I recognize this is happening and I'm going to work on it, even though it's so uncomfortable, then all you're doing is just maintaining status quo. Like, I recognize the pattern there. Okay, I'll do some self-care. But the pattern's not gonna go away just because you recognize it's there. You have to do something about it. And that is what exactly it is. It's working on your own shit. Work on your own shit because your shit affects other people. Right? The way you work, the relationships that you have, the working, whether it's in work or in life. It's like one person in the team who is always like angry and upset can very easily affect the whole team. It can also affect the client. It can affect the way the quality of work, right? So working on your shit is really important, to me anyway. And I want to show just two last examples of how your own self-mastery can come into the ways that we work in design. So the first one is like, okay, so what are my patterns? And can I think a little bit more about what my stories are in those patterns? This is a familiar scenario. Oh shit, I got a presentation tomorrow morning and I haven't started anything. What do? Okay, I'll just stay up late and work. I'll be fine. I'll just stay up late. Or maybe like send an SOS and like, Serene, can you help me? Or maybe you just go like, oh, never mind. I'll just wing it. I can talk very well, but I'll be fine. So what are the stories behind maybe some of these things? Right. This was for me anyway, like, okay, I am a failure, so everything must be perfect. Because I need it to be perfect, I'm just gonna work till 4 or 5 a.m. Even though my presentation is at 9 a.m. and I know logically that I should sleep. Maybe the story behind always asking someone for help at the last minute is because I don't like to plan ahead. I just find it so tiring. And then by winging it, I'm just really avoiding whatever that I'm afraid of that might show up when I really sit and think about the situation. Another scenario, which you may or may not have experienced yet, but probably one that you'll encounter when you start work. Oh my God, Sam didn't follow the template again. This is not our standard of work. What is the client going to think of us? How can this kind of thing be shipped and go out? So what do? Do you get upset and confront Sam? Do you run to your manager and say like, can you do something about it? Or it's like, oh, whatever, can't deal with it. I see some smiles, maybe it's really, yeah, so what's the story behind getting upset? Maybe actually what I am really upset is my credibility. Because your work affects how other people perceive me, okay? But I'm not really telling you that. I'm just giving you shit about the work. Perhaps by going to a manager, you have a story in your head that only someone with authority can deal with this. Versus like actually you can be the one that does something about it too. And by giving up, it's like, I'm doing all this stuff for the team, nobody sees the good work that I do, and then resentment starts to build, right? So just very brief examples, and I hope it inspires you to think a little bit deeper about like when you notice something happening over and over, like what's really driving that?
And I'm not saying that everything that drives a pattern is wrong. There's no right or wrong. There is too much or too little. Right? And then once you know what the pattern is, you know, we diverge in design all the time. And you diverge in your own patterns. Do I really need to work overnight on a deck? No. I could just show up with a bunch of Post-its and say, this is what I'm going to talk about. I could maybe print some photos up and then, you know, turn it into a walkthrough. So it still has the same impact, but much less effort. Or just come up with something and get the people coming for the presentation to do a role play, and then, you know, they're the ones doing the work instead. And instead of getting upset, how about understanding more context? What was really happening here, instead of assuming that it's just, you know, you don't want to follow the standards, right? Can you let non-critical things go instead of getting upset at every single thing? Also called choosing your battles. Yeah, and maybe, you know, you could possibly collaborate with the person on making a better version. Okay. And really, like, what you do every day matters more than what you do once in a while. And yeah, I just hope that this leaves you, you know, with a bit more inspiration to look at your patterns and work on them. So intuition, intention, inclination, I before we, inner work. What do these 5 things have in common? What? I, yes, you. All right, a bit cheesy maybe, but this is really what I want to leave you with.
Quite self-centered.
In design, we're always thinking about, like, how do I do this? How do I do that? Or what framework or what you know, method can I use? But really, you are the most precious tool. The way you think, how you feel, how you use those emotions and bring it into design, into the conversations with others, and how you show up. But none of this will matter if you're not paying attention. That's why it's precious and invisible. Right? Attention is like a torchlight. It's all in the dark unless you're looking at it and you're tracking it and you're saying, like, oh, I did it again. And that's okay, but, you know, I'm recognizing that I did that thing again, and now get better. You know, I'm not gonna get upset. I'm just gonna keep working. Okay? Take care of yourself and practice. I'm gonna leave you with 2 questions. What makes you precious as a designer that is different from the person sitting next to you or the person next to you on Zoom? And what is one small thing that you can change for yourself today? That's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sam. That was brilliant. Really good time to be talking about these things as everyone's embarking on new projects, looking after yourselves and each other. But I'm going to hand over to you guys to ask any questions about anything that Sam's covered here, or about anything else you'd like to know about her work, her
Ask me anything.
design.
As you can tell,
Over to you.
nothing is, yeah.
No boundaries.
Yeah, no boundaries. For the next half an hour.
How long does it take for you to recover from each burnout, and what motivates you to kind of bounce back?
It depends. The first burnout, I was so angry that I didn't want to do UX anymore. And so what I did was I was still working in digital, but I went into partnerships, more of the commercial side of the business, as a way to still kind of, you know, stay in touch, but not have to do design. And then I took a whole year of working in that role before I felt like, actually, I still love research and design, and I want to go back to it. The second and third times, I think, were more physical. I could not even get out of bed. And so I took like a 3-week break, and then my boss like cut back some of the projects as well. So I didn't have to fly in and out to do my work so much. Yeah. Oh, 2 men. You have to fight it. Yeah.
What are some tools that you've come across that help you maintain your daily attention and focus? I saw you have one, which was the amazing diary.
Yeah. So yeah, I was just gonna say Excel. I love Excel. So many things in Excel. But I do that as a nightly ritual. I also track a lot of what I do in my calendar, so that I can kind of use that as a reference when I do the nightly tracking. I do a lot of centering, and centering is like, you hear like ground yourself if you're nervous, right? Take deep breaths, stand tall. Centering goes a little bit further where you are checking in with yourself, what's going on. So the more you practice when you're not stressed, the more it can come back as muscle memory when you are. And then it's like just when I arrived, I was like telling Serena, oh my God, I'm so nervous. I just did my assignment. I'm probably not going to remember anything. And then internally I was centering and I was like, okay, I'm nervous, but it's okay. It's just RCA students. And yeah, so being able to check that, I think. So it's not like an app or something like that, but like those definitely help me a lot. Yeah.
What is an efficient way to deal with the days where you, despite putting a lot of hours and time in working on something, you clearly cannot see there wasn't any radical progress? You actually feel like you've wasted energy.
Mm-hmm.
What is an effective way to deal with that?
You mean like a project that's not going anywhere?
Well, like a specific day in the project, like a specific moment in the project where you put a lot of effort, but it doesn't go anywhere that specific day. You've made no progress. You feel like you've bogged down.
For me, it's to first recognize that that's what I'm feeling. And then I make a choice. Do I want to continue feeling that way, or can I reframe the situation into something else? The challenge, I guess, with thinking about something over and over again, it creates tunnel vision. And once you're in tunnel vision, it's very hard to think about anything else, right? So like, okay, yeah, like we didn't get to anywhere after this long day, but hey, I got to work with someone else that maybe I don't normally get the chance to, or like, yeah, we still don't have, a clear consensus of what direction to go with, but hey, we got this other stuff. So I think that reframing muscle, which I didn't talk about this time, is also very helpful. I'm not sure if that was what you were looking for.
What was? Thanks.
Yeah. There was a hand at the back.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, when working in remote teams and across time zones, how do you effectively kind of support one another? So that sort of dialogue between people and working with each other. Have you found any sort of examples from your experience where there have sort of been success stories in that digitally? Or I was just trying to translate what you were speaking there into sort of a digital context.
Yeah. Is there anything that you've tried?
Collaborative calendars actually can be quite a good way to work, where you actually block off your personal life.
Mm-hmm.
So like so people understand kind of when you're on and off, but sometimes, especially in different time zones or different, actions happen, and then things aren't noticed for later, and then there are like, you have to schedule in for then a time to speak. So then it takes longer to then have those sort of conversations, and take that time for one-on-one sort of context.
Yeah.
yeah, I was more curious to hear your perspective on that, maybe. With
Yeah, remote is really hard because so many of your signals are gone, and if you're not on a call with someone, you're not really getting any feedback, right? I'm gonna go along the lines of what am I paying attention to when I'm in a group who hasn't spoken up. When I notice that, hey, the team hasn't come together for something fun, can I schedule that in and say this is you must come. Anything else, just move. We did a lot of emoji check-ins back in my old team, just using emojis as a way to talk about like how was my day or how was my week. I did quite a bit more short one-on-one calls just to check in, or it's like texting and say like, hey, haven't heard from you in a while. What's up? Like they don't have to be huge things. I mean, it's just about paying attention to who have I not heard from, what data am I missing and how the team is doing, how the team health is, and kind of going from there. I mean, everyone's context is different, so you just kind of experiment as well. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story. The Excel sheet that you had, I had something quite similar, but I realized that I wasn't giving enough time to reflect the actions, habits that embedded in these toolkits that you've taught us today. So when you made your new one that refreshed, do you give time to recenter, reflect? Because something may not work for you, so that you remove some things and added more things in.
Yeah.
Doesn't that cause you stress? So my question is, do you give enough time? And if in that time, how do you distinguish what to remove, what to add?
So I think there's two questions, right? How did I evolve the sheet in a way, and do I reflect after that? The sheet has gone through, I think, 4 iterations. And I don't know if you remember seeing, but I even track the number of times I go to the toilet, do a poo, because I think that reflects your true gut health. I track how many hours I sleep, and I started this year, like what time do I sleep and what time do I wake up? And when I saw the number of reds, after my threshold was 1 a.m. and there's so many reds, and I was like, okay, I could get stressed about so many reds, or I can simply notice that this is what's happening right now. Can I cut myself some slack because I'm a student? And maybe I'll sleep a bit more next week. It's not like a hard rule, it's like I must not watch Netflix. That's so unrealistic, but like just manage it along the way. That makes sense. Yeah, and I also started reflecting now, adding a reflection column. It's not long, but it gives me additional qualitative data as well. And I also sit with whatever I track and write as I go through the day as well. So it's all kind of like you're swimming in your own soup. Yeah. Hope that answers your question.
Love Google Sheets.
Excel for the win. Yeah. Any other questions? Anything on Zoom? So quiet.
It's not so much of a question, but it's interesting because I was kind of going through a podcast today, which had this idea that they were talking about like depression and saying that it kind of results from internalizing too much, of like looking at yourself too much. Do you think like when you chart your entire kind of day and your proceedings, and you're saying that in like that much of a minute detail, do you think it has like a negative edge to it where at that point you're questioning everything you're doing through the day? Or like I just want to know like what's the right balance of doing that?
Yeah.
If you try to like chart everything you're doing, are you internalizing too much to a point that you get very conscious of it?
Yeah.
And I'll go back to for the sake of what? You know, like what are you tracking it for? I have had people try tracking it after they heard my talk, and maybe it didn't work out for them because maybe the Excel format wasn't the right or the best way to serve their own outcome. You have to, I think, go one step back and think about that first. For me, I just use it as a mirror. Yes, I can look at it from my Cal, but I just want to see it visually represented. At the very beginning, I used to get all geeky and do charts. Oh, look at my sheet pad. But I don't do it anymore. It's kind of like I recorded the day, I look at it, and I'll let it go. And then at the end of the month, I just kind of see like, okay, yeah, mostly I'm sleeping more, and I haven't exercised it, but that's okay. It will come when I can. So that's my attitude, and that prevents me from, oh my God, you're terrible, Sam. Look at what you're not doing, right? So that's also something to pay attention to. Like, we see what we want to see. Okay? And so when you're doing something like that for yourself, are you just seeing all the things that you're not having or not doing as well? Does that help?
So I'm very quiet, so
one more
hand.
I just wondered what you learned about yourself from working in Singapore and coming to London. Like, how has that impacted who you are as a designer, or I don't know what phrase you use now.
Yeah, wow, that's a big question. Because I started my sabbatical before I came. So at this point, I don't know who I am or what to call myself. Am I a designer? Yeah, yes, I can do those things, but it's not really something that I want to do now. You know, I talked about, am I a design leader? But I don't have a team. Can I really call myself a design leader? I can't even say the word artist without feeling like I want to like, and yet I make art, you know. So I'm just grappling with all these different things in this transition between Singapore and UK now, and you know, UK in the future. Don't know if that was answering your question, or you know, you were asking more about like professional differences or something. I think that's the response. Yeah.
I have just a simple question, and if you don't want to answer it, it's okay. What's your MBTI personality?
What do you think?
I think you're FG. I'm not sure.
I did it many years ago, like when I was in my 20s. I think INTJ. You're all gonna look at me a certain way now. But yeah, I don't really pay much attention to MBTI because or some of these things, because it's like, oh yeah, I do it because, you know, I'm an INTJ, or I don't do that because I'm an INTJ, but that kind of puts a box around, like, for myself. So I know that, you know, it's like reading horoscopes, and they tell you like tomorrow is the worst day of your life. You can read it and like, you know, go into a bunker, or you can just like Allah. Like, yeah, you know, and yeah, take it for yourself.
Right, well, I think that's been a fantastic session, and I think given a lot of us a lot to think about in terms of ourselves, looking after each other, doing your best work, and I think it just goes to show that, you know, throughout design careers or, you know, our lives, you're constantly changing and asking how, you know, how you can be better, and that goes, a lot of that's around being good to yourself, figuring that out. So
Absolutely.
thank you for leaving those 5 simple tools that I think we'll take away today, and hopefully maybe come back another time and talk about game design. I'd like to know more about it.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Sam.
Being such a fantastic audience as well.
Thank you.